Chapter 2, Phobias. My name is Thomas Allen Anderson, and I grew up in a place that could be considered rural. It does not matter the name of the town or which state it was in. Just know that it was the type of place where coal was once king, and you can find a hidden moonshine still back up in the woods. It was a far back place where few knew the exact way, and there were no road signs to follow. I was raised by my mother, Alice Anderson, in a one-bedroom frame house at the end of a dirt road that backed right up to those woods. My mother was a young mother. She was only 15 when I was born. I never knew my father, and by the way my mom spoke of him, I'm sure that is a good thing. I never knew that we were poor. I guess that is because everyone around us was poor too. All I knew was that my mother loved me, and I had my dog Zip to help me explore the world. I called my dog Zip because he would zip around me and out into the woods like lightning. He was a small, white and brown Jack Terrier. He was fast. He would bring up dead rabbits and leave them on the porch that he had chased down and killed. My mother hated that. You could often find me and Zip out in the woods behind my house. The forest grew right up to the back of our property, and it was a place that I found enchanting. At first, I found excitement out in those woods, but one day it had all changed for me. I soon found myself sitting up on the back porch, fearing those encroaching woods. Zip would leap off the porch and run out and stop, looking back and waiting for me to follow. I would stay right up on the porch with my hand on the rail, fearing to take one step further. Zip would run back, dash around me, and then bark. I would sit down on those steps and stare out into those trees and feel a rising fear deep inside my soul. I would cradle Zip in my arms as I stared out into those dark trees. Sometimes I would force myself right up to the edge of those trees like there was this invisible barrier that I was afraid to place one toe across. Standing there, I could hear the wind rustle the treetops and the creaking of the high limbs. The trees were thin at first, but the further you went in, the darker it got. Once 50 yards in, I could look back and not even see my own house. That is when the fear would rise up, and I would feel as if I was about to scream. If I did scream, who would hear? Who would come to save me? That is the mind of a child. A child's mind is filled with all kinds of irrational fears. Fear of the darkness, fear of something hidden under their bed. And I had all those normal fears. But my aversion to the woods behind my house came from some place different. I had once loved the woods. I had loved to explore them. But after one day, all that had changed, and I looked on them now with foreboding. Standing in the backyard as Mom hung laundry on the line, I stood and stared into those woods. It was an early fall day, and the sky was all gray, and there was frost on the grass this morning. The winds were whipping through the hollow, and Mom's sheets were popping on the line. I stood like a statue looking into those trees. "What's wrong, Tommy?" my mother asked as she walked up behind me. "I don't like the trees anymore. They look ugly," I said. My mother only smiled. "It's just because it's fall and all the leaves are dying. In the spring, everything will be all bright and green again." "I don't care," I said. "I wish a fire would come out and burn them all down." "Don't say that," my mother warned me. "A fire could burn down the house, and then what would we do?" "I just don't like them," I said in a whisper. "I don't care." Ray was a boy that lived down the way, and he would often come over and we would play outside. One day, Ray suggested we walk out into the woods and see if there was anything out there. I didn't want to go, but I was afraid to seem weak in front of Ray, so I quickly relented. "There could be hidden treasure," he said as he led the way out towards the trees. In just a moment, I reached that invisible boundary, and as I stepped across it, my eyes were heavenward, until the moment the forest had grown so dense that I could barely even see the sky anymore. I looked all around me in a panic as the trees were all around me. I swore that I could see ugly faces staring at me in the bark of the trees, like in The Wizard of Oz. I could also smell cigarette smoke. That was strange. As the leaves crunched underfoot, Ray was about 20 feet ahead of me, and Zip was sniffing around in the underbrush. "Look at this," Ray said as he kicked something metal that let out a deep, resonating boom. What Ray had found was an old metal gas barrel that some moonshiner had probably hauled out here a decade ago. As I was looking at the old rusted out barrel, Ray moved over to a spot where he squatted down. "Tommy, look at this," Ray said as he was moving the leaves aside. I walked over to where Ray was squatting and could see the remnants of an old campfire. There were some big flat rocks that were placed in a circle, and in the middle there were some black coals from some long ago fire. "Looks like someone was camping out," I said. "Here," Ray said as he dug something from up out of the leaves. It was an old empty pack of Lucky Strikes. He handed me the pack, and as I held it in my hand, a cold wind whipped up from the valley below. I shuddered in the cold wind as I looked all around where I stood. "Let's head back," I said. "Maybe the guy left some cool stuff," Ray remarked as he continued to move the leaves aside. "I'm heading back," I said as I whistled to Zip. "Come on, boy." "Why do you want to leave?" Ray asked as he stood up and wiped his hands on his jeans. "There's nothing out here," I said to him in a stern voice. "It's just stupid trees." I clapped my hands as Zip ran up from out of the underbrush. After we had made it back to my house, Ray headed on back home, and I took a seat on the back steps and stared once again out into the forest. As I sat there looking at the trees as they swayed in the wind, I saw him. He had long black hair that was blown by the wind. He was tall and thin, and his face was long and narrow. He was wearing black jeans and a white cotton t-shirt. I could see that he had one sleeve rolled up, and even from this distance I could see that there was a pack of cigarettes rolled up in that sleeve. He stood up in the trees in the shadows, but I could plainly see him. I was watching him, and I could tell that he was watching me. I was too afraid to move. His dark eyes stared right into me. My eyes were locked with his, and I could not look away. I could feel my heart pounding and hear it beating in my ears. I had to blink, and when I did and looked back, he was gone. That night, as I stood at the window of my room that faced out into the woods behind my house, I was sure I could see the faint flicker of a faraway campfire. Who was he, I questioned as I looked out my window. Who was that man? Was he watching me? Had that been his campsite, and that his old pack of Lucky Strikes? Had he always been there, always watching me from the shadows of the forest as I sat on the back steps? Was he even real, or was he just a figment of my imagination? I could not be sure. At night, my mom would tuck me in, and as she sat there on the edge of my bed, my childish questions would come. "Why don't I have a dad?" I asked. "You don't need a dad. I'm a dad and a mom," she said. "You know what I mean. What would happen if something bad came?" "What bad is going to come?" my mother asked as she looked down on me. "What if there were bad people around?" "I would kick their butt," my mom said with a warm smile. "But I'm scared of the woods. What if something bad lives in those woods?" "Why are you scared of the woods, baby?" "I feel like they're watching me. I think something bad lives up in those woods." "The only things out in those woods are critters and drunk hunters. There's no such things as monsters. Hear me?" my mother said. I shook my head as Mom bent down and gave me a kiss. She turned off my light and walked from my room. As I lay there with Zip by my side, I thought about what she had just said. Yes, there are no such thing as monsters. There are no werewolves or vampires, mummies or mass killers. But is that what all monsters look like? The most frightening monsters are those that live right out in your neighborhood, right under your nose. There's an old proverb that states that the devil catches more souls with a golden net. A true monster is not going to come at you snarling. A true monster is going to come at you smiling. The worst monsters are those that you love the most. I was afraid because I felt encircled by my fear. The woods were all around my house, and out there in the shadows there was a true evil. But just like a forest that surrounds us, so do people. We live in a forest of other people. Most do not even come into our little worlds, but every now and then a monster crosses our path. Most of the time we do not even know how close we might have come to losing our own lives. A man might follow a pretty girl and lose his nerve, and she is never the wiser. It is true evil that crosses that line and goes that one step further. Right now, the monster is just lurking out behind the boundaries of your safe little world. He is sitting back in the shadows, just up there behind that invisible line. Where in my world there was an invisible line where the trees began, there is also an invisible line that lives inside each of us. Most of us might creep up to the edge and just look over, but we dare not step over because past that line is where evil dwells. It is all an illusion, and there are some that step right up and across because deep inside the line has been wiped clean away. In later years, I would again find myself up against that line, and I would walk a dangerous tightrope. After a long night of partying, I would ask myself if on that day I sat on the back steps and saw that man lurking up in the woods, had I maybe seen my future self? Was that me stalking my prey up in the shadows, watching, daring myself to step across to what ends? Had I always been watching? Were those trees just a metaphor for a secret place that lives inside myself where I am able to do horrible things? Up in the trees, all is hidden from the world. Under the leaves, anything can be buried. In the winter, when the snow falls, all is quiet as a tomb. When the snow falls, all your evils are covered up by a blanket of pureness. Have you ever seen blood in the snow? There is such a dramatic contrast in the white and the red. It is shocking, like a bat to the head. As I had gotten older, I had learned about all my phobias. I have a fear of the woods, and also a fear that I'm not even sure has a name. In my mind's eye, I can see the face of a woman as she lays on her back covered in new fallen snow. She is almost completely covered by the snow except for a bit of her face that just sits above the new fallen snow. Her face is locked in a look of terror, and her eyes are black and glassy. Her mouth is partially opened, and I can see that she has two front teeth that are broken and bloody in her mouth. Her lips are purple and cracked with traces of blood at the corners of her mouth. I do not know who she is, but I know that she is a piece of me. I can tell by the expression on her face that the last moments she spent on this earth were spent in horror and pain. Who is she? Why does she haunt my dreams? What am I afraid of? Are there things that I'm capable of doing that I myself am not aware of? I see this woman lying out in the snow just where the trees begin, and I come back to my invisible line. That symbolic line that I am too afraid to cross. Out there in the woods is my destiny. Out there is where I was made. Among the trees I had once found peace, but today all I feel is fear. In prison I was able to speak with a psychiatrist. My doctor was a squirrely little man by the name of Matthew Preacher. Doc Preacher loved to talk about the woods. He loved the symbolism of the trees. You once said to me that the trees could also symbolize people, that you never knew among whom you mingle, Dr. Preacher said as he sat back in his chair with his clipboard in his lap. Yes, I said as I sat back in my chair as well. Dr. Preacher looked over the edge of his glasses that sat on the tip of his nose. What did you mean by that? I just meant that you never know who you come in contact with from day to day. When I was a little kid, I was scared of the woods behind my house, and my mother assured me that there was no such things as monsters. I later wondered if maybe real monsters come at you with smiling faces. Maybe I am always surrounded by the forest, but not the forest of trees. It's a forest of people. Which of those people are monsters? Where are they lurking? Preacher sat forward as he looked at me intently. What if you are the monster? I looked down at my feet and then back up to the doctor's eyes. If I am, then I was created out there in those trees behind my house. What happened in those trees? Dr. Preacher asked me. I brushed my hands through my hair. I don't know. I just know that I used to love the woods. They were a place that seemed magical to me. But after one day, all that changed. What caused it to change? My heart was pounding, but I did not know why. I remember the days when the forest had been a place that held freedom for me. I had never liked school, and education seemed like a phobia to me. I would sneak away to the trees and wander for hours out there in the serenity of nature. In the woods, I felt like I walked nearer to God. But it all changed one day, and from that moment on, where the trees began, everything seemed a horror to me. It was like being hurt by a person that you love the most in life. When the person hurts you, it's not even the pain that hurts the most. What hurts is the betrayal of your trust. You are shocked by their actions, and it poisons you in life. That is what happened to me. I was poisoned by my fear of the woods. It was not long after the fear began to grow inside me that I began seeking out things that could numb my pain. I began to drink and smoke pot. It was not long before I was shooting meth up my arm. All it took was a reason to seek out the underbelly of society, and then there it was. Shooting meth led to stealing and breaking and entering. All this led to my name becoming very popular with the local police in my town. Every time a car got broken into or something went missing, I was the first person looked at. I was a usual suspect. All the stores in town knew me, and anytime I walked in, I was followed around from aisle to aisle. The town that I lived in was pretty small, and it was hard for a person with my reputation to keep a low profile. It was the usual stuff at first: underage drinking, possession of drug paraphernalia. But it didn't take long for my rap sheet to contain enough convictions that led to my first stint in prison. In 18 months, I was back out and roaming the same old streets. Back in those days, cars were really easy to steal. All it was a screwdriver, and you could steal most cars in my town. We'd steal maybe 2 a night, and we had this guy that owned a body shop that gave us $500 for every one we brought in. All that cash went straight up my arm. "Why are you doing this to me?" my mother screamed at me with tears streaming down her face. "To you?" I shouted back. "I am doing this to me because there is something broken inside," I said as I pounded on my chest. "There's something missing, and I can't fill it up, this hole, no matter what I do." "Why do you have a hole?" my mother pleaded with me. "Is it because you didn't have a father? He was an asshole, okay? And I got pregnant by mistake. I was 15 and I did the best I could. I love you, and having you was never a mistake." "I don't know," I cried as I turned from her and slammed my fist into the wall. I broke my pinky as I punched that wall, but the pain I felt at that moment was nowhere close to the pain I felt that day out in the woods. I could still smell cigarette smoke in my nose. "Let it go," I shouted as I ripped open the front door and walked out into the yard. Mom chased me into the yard, grabbing my arm and pulling me back. "You're going to kill yourself if you keep this up." I jerked away from her grip, causing her almost to fall to the ground. "Good. I can't wait till that day comes so all this pain will end." I have always regretted that statement. I had not known at the time how those words would someday come back to haunt me. When you are young, you feel invincible. You feel that 40 might as well be 90 when you are 17. I crashed on a buddy's couch from that night on. I never spent another night at my mother's house. The months that followed were a blur of drinking and speed. I devolved from the person that I had been into this creature that existed from moment to moment. I did so many drugs and drank so much that I would black out from time to time and wake up in strange places. I would stay up so long on the meth that I would begin to hallucinate. I would then crash and sleep for at least a day. There were times and days lost to me forever, and this is what would lead to my eventual downfall.